we're getting your chair. You can come and... No, no. Should I introduce you? Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I just wanted to say one or two words. I don't know, like you, but I was absolutely riveted by that last session. But I wanted to just say something before Jeremy and the rest discuss British politics and a whole range of other issues. I've known Jeremy Corbyn for probably 40 years now, and I don't get involved into British domestic politics. But he and I, for many years, about 20 years, worked on behalf of another people whose existence was often denied, including their entire culture and certainly their political rights. And they were the Kurds. And in the 1980s and the 1990s, there was a horrific civil war that was going on in Turkey, in the southeast of Turkey, where over 3 million villagers got displaced. Many of the political leaders, I'm talking about democratic leaders, were imprisoned, sometimes for simply reading out poems, which Jeremy did today in the yew trees with many young people. And I was a young human rights lawyer. And by pure chance, Turkey had signed the individual right to petition at the European Court of Human Rights. And so we, unlike Blinny was saying when it comes to issues to do with other conflicts, we were able to take a series of cases. We brought 400 cases before the European Court on Human Rights in relation to every form of violation, and won 97% of those cases, changing the law, often in Turkey, but throughout the whole of Europe. I was a very, very young lawyer, but we could never have done that without the support of a range of people, including Harold Pinter, Arthur Miller, Helena Kennedy, Michael Mansfield, but also Jeremy. Jeremy gave us the platform in the House of Commons. He was everywhere in Hackney, wherever you went to a community meeting, he was there speaking up on behalf of the Kurds. We formed the Kurdish Human Rights Project. So without getting into any form of disputes about British politics, I just want to give Jeremy a round of applause on behalf of the Kurdish people, because he did a marvelous job. And we will never, ever forget it, because as young lawyers, we needed the support, the moral and political support of all those types of people. So Jeremy, it's taken a long time for you to get here. I don't think he even realized I was up in Scotland. But I'm so pleased he's here, and also had the chance to enjoy Traquair, and also many of the young people who are involved in this festival on your poetry walk. So anyway, over to you, and thank you very much, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. My name is Oscar Guardiola, and it's a real pleasure to be with you again in such wonderful company. As you can see, the plan for this conversation is to try and answer the absolutely key question: how is it that Jeremy Corbyn keeps open this absolutely amazing channel with our young people here? What is it that makes him and them such a unit? That's what we're here to explore, but also the makeup of an independent life. My answer to the question, what makes an independent life, is one that you already know: poetry. So I've asked Jeremy to read one of his poems. You didn't know that, right? That he's also a poet. So Jeremy,
Do you want to introduce our colleagues first?
they are going to introduce themselves because
All right.
No?
Yeah.
So, yeah, we'd like to thank, obviously, Beyond Borders and both of you for the incredible opportunity to do this. I'm Duncan.
I'm Ella.
And, yeah, obviously an incredible opportunity to be up here, especially at our age, and to be able to have this dialogue and ask questions to, I mean, you know.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah,
A real
looking forward
privilege
it a
to
lot.
share the stage with you both.
Yeah.
oh, the pleasure is ours. Jeremy?
Right. First of all, thanks for inviting me, and what a wonderful place and a wonderful occasion this is. I enjoy poetry very much, and our project, Peace and Justice Project, produced a poetry anthology called Poetry for the Many, which is now in its 3rd edition, and we've done lots of poetry events all over the country, and a most amazing variety of people turn up. And what I love about poetry is it it doesn't have to rhyme, it doesn't have to have meter, it doesn't have to have any specific subject. Basically, you can say anything you like in a poem, and it's a way of expression. And so I always encourage people, particularly young people, to never be afraid of writing poetry. So most of the stuff I write is political, is immediate, and in the book there's one of my poems about Calais. What I was going to read this evening is something that's perhaps dear to the hearts of everyone that goes to Edinburgh any time. It's called The Edinburgh Train. It's not particularly political, but I hope you'll enjoy it, okay? I'm just giving you that health warning. And I obviously come to Edinburgh quite a lot and always come by train. So, Edinburgh Train. What is poetic about a train? It travels on rails that are 4 foot, 8.5 inches apart. It goes from King's Cross to lots of places. It carries people. They jostle for space to sit by a window, at a table near a plug, or handy for the toilet. They block the aisle, they leave bags in the way, they leave rubbish behind, and silently resent every other passenger. You all know that one. It goes relentlessly north, rushes through Finsbury Park, barely notices Potter's Bar, ignores Stevenage, blanks Peterborough, draws breath at York out of respect for our railway history and Yorkshire. Darlington is ghostly, Durham endlessly beautiful, Newcastle seems able always to change with the times. Then seriously on to Berwick and its great river and border and history and sea. In darkness, the coast is missing, which in daylight you can almost touch and wonder. And then around the coast and Waverley beckons, a station for every writer, but this one named after one. All our dreams and life seen in window reflection of our lives and dreams of what was and is. Daydreams end with cheerful ticket checks and rubbish bags and tea slopping in communal messiness. That's it.
Jeremy, you've said that poetry tells truths that often cannot be expressed in discourse or prose. One senses a connection between your love for poetry and your politics. Is there such a connection? Can you articulate it for us?
Oh, I think there's an enormous connection between poetry and politics. And if you think of Pablo Neruda, for example, his amazing output of poetry throughout his life, phenomenal output, was very active politically. He was a communist senator in Chile in the 1940s and 1950s, was subject, as you know, to McCarthyite hatred that was pushed him, and he was forced into exile. This is long before Pinochet had even been heard of. And then Neruda's whole life was political, and sadly died in hospital in Chile after the coup, and to this day I believe he was murdered by the Pinochet regime or the CIA or a bit of both. So I see him as an example, and there are many others. Wordsworth in his own way was political, Coleridge in his own way was political, certainly Shelley was extremely political in all that he wrote, and so our poetry collection is a combination of those things and those voices. And then if you read other poets such as Maya Angelou, And many of the West African poets, particularly Ben Okri and others, are in their own way very political about the life of African people. And one poem I put into our book, which I didn't know a lot about until I was searching for a particular theme I wanted to cover, was eventually, we put in the book, The Runaway Slave at Pilgrim's Point by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Now, I was sort of in two minds about putting the poem in at all, because I thought the story of slavery should be told by somebody who'd been a slave or somebody that was experiencing slavery. She was very interesting. She grew up in a wealthy family in Yorkshire, was sent as a child to Jamaica to see the family estates and then observe what slavery was about, came home and had a massive argument with her father and her mother and the whole family, and said slavery was immoral, it was evil, it had to end, and the family should have nothing to do with it, and so on. And she was told pretty bluntly by her father, you either accept and shut up, or you get out and you'll never get anything from us and we'll never see you again. So she said, okay, I'm off, and went, and that was it. She actually died in poverty in Italy eventually, and she wrote this amazing poem called Runaway Slave at Pilgrim's Point, which describes in, I think, brilliant way the experiences of slaves, what they went through, and the numbers that died on the Middle Passage. And so, again, she did it because she was committed to ending slavery, but it is a political poem, and there are many, many others that are. Many other people write poetry. They probably don't realize it's very political. They're describing their lives, their existence, the gritty life they lead. And a lot of young people doing rap music, it is poetry in its own way.
Yeah.
It is poetic, and it does give us a strong message. So I think poetry is very political. And it saddens me how increasingly schools everywhere across the UK, Scotland including, spend less and less time on music, art, theatre and poetry, and more on a very narrow, very tight curriculum with tick box examinations at the end of it. Surely the key to education is not what facts we ram into young people's brains, it's whether we give them the wherewithal to learn, to teach themselves, and above all, to ask questions and inquire, and never be afraid to think outside the box. Poetry takes us outside the box.
We're gonna go back to the current times and that kind of repression of our imagination, which is also perhaps reflecting a more general atmosphere of repression. But I find interesting that there is a bit of a resonance, a parallel between the life that you just described and your own. I mean, you were born in Wiltshire, in Chippenham, actually, like my older daughter, by the way. Oh, yes.
She's a moonraker too.
She is.
Oh, there you go.
But then you grow up and you went to Jamaica.
Yeah.
And you spend a fair amount of time there doing voluntary service, teaching geography, if memory serves me well, among other things. And then you go to the rest of Latin America.
Yeah, that's right.
Tell us about that experience. How did it contribute to the makeup of your political consciousness? Would you recommend it to our young companions here on stage?
I'd recommend greater care than I took before I set off on the journey. But I'll come to that in a moment. Yes, I grew up initially in the West Country of England in Wiltshire, and it was frankly idyllic. There was no nurseries, so school came when I was 5, and that was the first time I'd been anywhere really. It was a bit of a shock actually. I didn't really fancy school because I was quite happy being at home, enjoying the garden and the fields and roaming about and all that. I thought school was a bit of an interruption of my life, and I wasn't happy actually, to be quite honest. And I was even less happy when I got into the school itself, but there we go. And then a few years later, my dad had got a job in the Midlands. He worked for English Electric, so we had to move. And that's where I was until I was 18, again in a rural area, in a small grammar school, which there was a lot of discussion and debate about the Vietnam War, about nuclear weapons, about the Soviet Union putting satellites in space. It was unbelievable the things they found to argue about. And I nearly always found myself in a minority of one on most subjects, which was testing.
See a pattern.
Which was testing. You could see a pattern here. And I was not actually particularly successful in school. The only things I was really interested in were English literature and history, and geography because of the politics of geography. And so I wasn't going to go to university. I hadn't got the grades anyway. And so I found this leaflet to apply for VSO, and I had an interview for voluntary service overseas that was kind of absurd. It was a sort of colonial interview. Now, Corbyn, you're going to the tropics. How will you cope with the hot weather? Oh, just get over it. Well, what are you going to do when you get prickly heat? I said, what? What is it? It was like something out of Monty Python, to be quite honest. Anyway, so I came out of this interview. I thought, well, these people are bonkers, you know. Are they trying to recreate the empire or something? And I'm giving it out to them saying I want to go to these countries that are newly independent to support them in their path to independence. They didn't like that bit very much. But anyway, I thought, well, that's the end of it, you know. Go and find something else to do. Go and look for an apprenticeship or something. And then I got this letter saying you've been accepted. I thought, wow, weird. So I was then asked to go to Jamaica, which I did, and I was assigned to a school, Kingston College. My job was to teach geography to the third and fourth forms, to promote outdoor activities, hiking and so on, and then voluntarily I also helped in a newly established Jamaican theatre called Theatre 77, and also I worked with the polio rehabilitation group in supporting victims of polio, of which there were a great many at that time. So it was very full-on existence. I was completely unprepared and, you know, in every way for this, and I was sort of thrown in at the deep end, and you suddenly confronted with a class of 70 kids who weren't that keen on learning geography and trying to explain things to them. So you learnt about crowd control, because that's what it was, and you learnt about trying to get people to learn and do things themselves. This was mixed ability teaching as well. And so I found it absolutely fascinating, but very hard work, and learnt a lot about humankind and human behaviour, and started learning a lot about Caribbean and African history and black consciousness through the work of a number of people, but particularly Walter Rodney and his historic book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, which came a bit later. He was there in Jamaica, but was expelled from the country by the then government. So I was developing this whole ideas in lots of areas, and it was absolutely amazing experience to me. It was far better than going to university, just having to cope with all of this in a short period. And then afterwards, I have always been fascinated by South America, Latin America in general, and so I went by various ships and things to Brazil, and then went all through Brazil and Argentina and Chile and Peru and Bolivia and Paraguay and Uruguay. And most of the countries were under military rule at the time. I was arrested in every single one of them because I kept on joining demonstrations, which probably was not a good idea.
I saw a picture in Brazil of a demonstration. You are in the demonstration in Brazil.
I was there, yeah.
Under military dictatorship.
So it was not a very sensible thing to do, but you know, when you're 19 or 20, you know it all. So I learnt a great deal from that process, and that has always given me a love and understanding, and the works that you do about the historical process of Latin America and the arrogance with which Europeans particularly approach the history. The civilizations, the Maya, the Inca, the Aztec, and many, many more pre-Inca, pre-Maya civilizations were far, far in advance of anything that was in Europe at that time. And that is something that is frequently misunderstood. So I would recommend anyone to read your works, but also read Open Veins of Latin America, which is an amazing work. And so this gave me a concept of history, which is why I'm so determined, and I put this in our manifestos, that we start to change the way in which history is taught in our schools. History should be a process and a voyage of discovery of the whole world, the understanding of how societies develop, how technology influences and changes things, and above all, how that influences the politics and the attitudes towards different language, different colour, different ethnicity. Racism in part comes from a deep misunderstanding of history and the idea of European arrogance over the rest of the world. These things, to me, are very, very important, and I did. So I learnt a great deal from that. So it was a most enormous privilege that anyone could ever have to be offered that experience.
Thanks for that, Jeremy. We have shown William how to sell books.
Why is he not? Is he not? I thought
He's not selling enough.
I thought his books
He's
sold
not
themselves.
selling enough.
You know. Come on, William, they sell themselves.
You were in 1970 in Chile,
Yeah.
right at the time when the generation of Pablo Neruda, Salvador Allende, and Carmen Lazo rise to power.
Yeah.
Almost from the get-go, they are under fierce attack. Allende in particular, but also Neruda, are denounced as being both bon vivants and revolutionaries, as being socialists but also Democrats. There is a memo written by Henry Kissinger which warns that Allende is much more dangerous than Fidel Castro, because Fidel Castro looks like a revolutionary. He has a big beard, and green fatigues and so on. Not Allende. And so they mount a campaign against him, end up calling him racist. You found yourself at the end of a fair amount of attack. How does an independent politician, an independent mind, carries himself through that kind of attack? What keeps you going?
Allende is a fascinating historical figure. He'd been a senator for a very long time. He was 3 times presidential candidate in Chile. He became a great friend of Neruda, even though they were rivals for the nomination for the left grouping for the 1970 election. But Neruda campaigned along with many, many other people, particularly Victor Jara, to win that election. And you're quite right, Kissinger and the CIA were absolutely terrified of Allende because he didn't look like a revolutionary. There's no pictures of him anywhere that I've ever seen. He's not in a suit and tie, and that is on the hottest day. And he was a member of the Freemasons all of his life. And so they were very confused by him. And he also described himself as a Marxist. Many on the left in Chile, before the election in 1970, were actually quite cynical about whether Allende would do anything, whether he could deliver or not. Some people actually said to me, well, we'll vote for him, but he's basically an establishment figure. And you probably have picked all this up yourself, which he obviously absolutely was not. And so I've got an awful lot of empathy for him, and the sheer bravery of the man and the final broadcast he made when he was under attack by British planes on the Moneda Palace is something we should all think about. When you're under attack, you've got to think, well, why? What are they doing? Why are they making up these lies? Why are they constructing all this stuff? And you have to think to yourself 2 things. One, why they're doing it. And secondly, you have a responsibility for the people that put you in the position you're in to do your best to deliver for them. So whatever personal hurt you might feel like feeling, forget it. That's not the point. The point is you're there for a political purpose to try and bring about a change. And my determination in leading the Labour Party was to try to turn the Labour Party into a community-based organisation. Hence I set up community organising units, which were bitterly opposed by the right in the Labour Party, and also shifted the dial on the politics of the economy, ending austerity, public ownership, all of those issues, and above all about redistribution of power and wealth. The area we made quite a lot, but not enough in my view, progress on was on international issues and foreign policy. I wish we'd had time to make more. But the attacks I was getting were actually much more related to my views on militarism, war and the rest of the world than they were on the economic issues facing this country, because the establishment felt more under threat because I wanted to move us into a different direction. Just blank your minds for a minute, then think. Now, if we had a British government that said, there is no way we will tolerate anything to do with genocide, there's no way we'll sell arms to genocidaires, there's no way we'll do anything other than looking at each conflict in the world as a way of resolving that conflict for peace and looking at the causes of why people are made into refugees, why they have to flee, instead of joining in this disgusting chase down a rabbit hole of following the Reform Party on their racist agenda. Just imagine if we had a government that was utterly determined to redistribute power and wealth, increase wages and living standards for the very poorest. That would mean changes at the other end. It would mean higher taxes for the very wealthy. It would mean a lot of, probably they would call it pain for the wealthy, but goodness, why do we tolerate the levels of inequality that we do in our society? That's what I wanted to achieve, and that's what I was determined to achieve, and that's what the new party is equally determined to achieve.
Just took us there. So, this is the perfect cue for me to give you the word. But let me ask one final question. We have established that being independent is hard work and often comes at a high cost. But
I never set out to be an independent, by the way.
Uh-huh.
I was removed from the Labour Party.
Sure, but also that it is in those difficult circumstances when people make the possible the impossible. And here you are, again, trying to do the impossible. A new party, a leftist party. Tell us about it. What's new about it? Has it learned from the past? Tell us more.
Well, you're asking me you're in danger of asking me a lot of detailed questions of a party that has not yet had its founding conference. So we don't want to get too far ahead of the curve here. I was under pressure from 2020 onwards to establish a new political party. I felt that there had to be a growth of demonstrable growth of independence, of people of a sort of broadly similar political direction around the country. And before we could do that, I also did not want to be a sort of top-down political operation run by Westminster or whatever else. And so I resisted those calls. It annoyed my friends very much indeed. A lot of people were very sharp with me about it, but I said, no, that's the position I'm in. I also felt that if I wasn't going to be allowed to be even considered as a Labour candidate for the election of 2024, then if local people wanted it, I would run as an independent, which eventually I did, and we put an enormous effort into that election campaign and won it. It was very important to win that campaign before we went on to try and start or launch anything else, because had we not succeeded in winning my re-election last year, we would have been in a very much weaker position. So I was very proud of the result we achieved and the enormous efforts that a lot of people put into that campaign. And so we then decided, me and a lot of other people, we'd form yourparty.uk, not because that's the final name. We wanted an inclusive name. And I thought, actually, if we don't give a name to the party now, but give that as the working name, maybe that'll be the name in the end, I don't know.
It might
But
be the allotment party.
The allotment party, a lot of allotments, yep, I can see. You want something that is short, inclusive, memorable, and hopeful. So if any of you got any ideas out there, I'm listening. And we then launched, and I was expecting we'd get sort of around 200,000 people would write in or sign up. The figure is now 800,000, which is 4 times the size of any other political party in this country. Now, they're not all members. There are no members yet, but clearly there is a huge resonance there, and we're absolutely inundated with people wanting to set up and organise local groups, and to be quite honest, it's a logistical challenge to do all of that, inevitably, but it's happening. And the first big event we're doing is next weekend in Lancashire, in Blackburn, and then later doing an event in Preston. And we're using that as a template for how we organise. We've written to everybody that's signed up in the vicinity of Blackburn, and then we'll get them all together and take it from there. Then we'll do the same in other places. We're looking to a launch conference probably in November, probably in Birmingham. In the case of Scotland and Wales, it will be up to people in Scotland and Wales what they do. I had a long discussion with some friends this morning in Scotland about what we're going to be doing there, likewise in Wales. But the principle to me is, first of all, it's got to be rooted in community grassroots campaigning and real involvement in community politics and campaigning, not just an electoral vehicle. Electoral vehicle is a product of the work you do and the solidarity you get in the communities. And the broad principles on the declaration letter we sent out are: one, global peace and understanding, you get my message on that. The other one is economic justice and equality within our society. The third one is how we treat the very poorest in our society, why we have so many children living in poverty, so many people with disabilities living in desperate poverty. Fourth is environmental sustainability, so we stick to and adhere to the net zero targets. And the last thing is about how we relate within and to different communities. What we have at the moment is Reform running around the country, listening to people's grievances, and there are, goodness knows, lots of things to be listening to about grievances, and then somehow or other, miraculously, every single problem anywhere in the whole of the UK is the fault of desperate people trying to get out of France to get to Britain in leaky boats because they were once working for the British Army in Afghanistan or other refugees. We've got this vile attack on refugees, the racism that goes with that. There's got to be an alternative voice, and I want yourparty.uk to be that alternative voice against Reform and against the horrible divisive politics that they are promoting.
But you say all these things of the new party, and it sounds like a wonderful idea, but it's come under a lot of fire from some of your own colleagues even. The one that springs to mind is Diane Abbott, the former Labour MP, who, speaking in Edinburgh a few days ago, said that the party wouldn't have any success, and she'd warned you against it because of the fundamentals of first past the post and the electoral system we have here in the UK. What do you think? Do you think there's validity to those criticisms? Yeah. And is electoral reform something that's going to be on your agenda as you go forward?
Diane has made those views very clearly known to me for quite a long time. Usually in the evening, somewhere in the House of Commons. It's fine. I'm very well aware of her views. She must also be aware that Labour support has plummeted since the low bar of the last general election. And in many places, independents are winning or Reform is winning. Labour is not. And she has already been suspended from the PLP anyway because she quite correctly voted against the 2-child benefit cap. She was right to do that. Now, the electoral system does favour established parties to a point, and that is first past the post system. I want to see electoral reform. I don't want to lose the constituency link between MPs and a community. What I would like to see is an electoral reform which brings about proportional representation for an additional member list. So you have elections per constituency. We could have larger constituencies to get fewer members. That's worthy of looking at. But above all, to then have an additional member system so that you get an evening up of it. And that would mean you'd get MPs elected. So it's a bit like the Bundestag system in Germany. The second point about democracy is actually to stop fiddling around and abolish the House of Lords and set up a proportionally elected upper chamber with roughly the same powers it has at the present time, so you don't create a constitutional logjam. And that seems to me to be a good way forward. Now, are we going to be electorally immediately very successful? I don't know. All I do know is that there has to be an alternative put, and we will put that. And the independent groups that are already there in operation, like in Liverpool and a number of other places, are actually quite successful, and they're winning seats. There's a big movement going on in Newcastle and other places. So I will politely, because I'm always polite, respectfully disagree with Diane on this occasion. She and I have managed to find a few things to disagree about over many years, but we remain good friends.
So I'd like to touch on when you were first getting into politics, you spoke about how you had experience in teaching beforehand and also travelling. If you were to get into politics, if you were our age looking to get into politics, and you know how the political system works, would you do anything differently, or would you have continued to do what you did in the past?
I didn't set out with huge political ambitions as a young person. I was involved in peace organisations like CND and Vietnam War campaigns and so on. I was involved in environmental campaigns from very early on, and talked about what I did in the early part of my life. And then I later had a number of jobs and eventually became a trade union organiser with a union that's now part of Unison called National Union of Public Employees. And I was approached by people in my community to stand for the council in Haringey in North London, which I did, eventually selected and did. And I learnt a great deal there about representation of people in communities and so on. And then I was later approached by people in Islington North to ask if I'd be prepared to be considered as a Labour candidate. And it was the existing MP then had joined the SDP, so I did. And then I was very narrowly selected as the candidate, and we eventually won the election in 1983. And I've been there ever since. What I would say to anyone who's interested in being a political representative, politically active and so on, ask yourself the question, why? Ask yourself the question, can you stay the course with what you believe in? And secondly, be involved in a cause. Environment, housing, international human rights, there's a whole lot of things, but be involved in something. So understand that what motivates people isn't necessarily the whole story on every aspect of politics. What motivates people is their own lives, their own experience, and also usually often a passion for a particular cause. What's been interesting of the past, long time, but particularly the last 18 months, has been the growth of this huge growth of the support for Palestine in Britain. There are more than 1 million people in the UK that have taken part in some activity or the other in support of the Palestinian people. That is far larger than any other political campaign that I can ever remember in my history, and they're far more denigrated than any other campaign in history. And I think we've just got to call it what it is, the genocide that's going on, and we have got to be on the side of the Palestinian people. We've got to just do everything we can for them.
On the topic of choosing a cause that you're passionate about, you said that there's been a lot of increase in support for people in Palestine. What do you think the support from both your new party as well as young people supporting Palestine could look like for the people in Gaza?
I think the people in Gaza they want any support they can get from anywhere, because they're in the most desperate situation possible, and they want to know that there are people acting in solidarity with them around the world. If you look at it objectively, the people in Gaza are in an utterly impossible bind. The vast majority of the population of Gaza are direct descendants of the Nakba generation of 1948. Not everybody, but the vast majority are. Israel clearly now is into the Greater Israel strategy of full occupation of Gaza, the West Bank and the Jordan Valley, and as a starter trying to expel the population of Palestine from Gaza, either into Egypt, who is not prepared to allow them to come in, or the latest thing is to try and pay South Sudan to take 1 million Palestinians to live there, which I think is a grotesque idea. Do they want support? Yes. Do they recognise what we're doing is important? And what I'm trying to do is obviously give all the support I can, but also through our project we've set up an independent public inquiry into what the British government's policies are on the 4th and 5th of September. I produced a private member's bill in Parliament to set up a Chilcot-style inquiry into policy on Palestine. That's been blocked by the government, and so we're doing it independently ourselves. And it will be open, public and online on the 4th and 5th of September as a way of exposing what is corruption of the arms trade that's making a great deal of money out of the bombardment of the people of Palestine. So we've just got to be resolute and determined and keep on supporting them in every way that we can.
You speak about how important it is to... Final question, okay. You speak about how important it is to have a cause, and for many people, as you said, especially British young people, that cause is Palestine and that cause is Gaza. With the recent arrests made by the British government, made by the police, of hundreds of people peacefully protesting in London under the Palestine Action banner, it feels quite intimidating now to go out and to protest for Palestine and for any cause really, because where's the line? Where's that slippery slope going to stop? What is the best way for us as British young people to get involved and to make our voices heard without, risking our futures with a potential terrorism charge?
Look at the totality of it, the way in which there are systematic attempts, sometimes achieved by the government, to restrict demonstrations, the right to demonstrate, the right to speak on it all. When we organised the big Palestine march on the US Embassy, which had, from memory, 800,000 people on that march, the Home Office got in an absolute tiz about it a week before, and had drafted ready a legislation to go as emergency legislation to both houses of Parliament to ban the march and ban any demonstration on Palestine. And apparently there was an argument between the Metropolitan Police and the Home Office, and the Metropolitan Police simply said to the Home Secretary, what are we going to do when 1 million people turn up in London to protest about Palestine? Come on, where's the answer? The Home Office said, well, it's your job. They said, no, you're the ones that are setting this thing up. What are you going to do? So they backed off and they never introduced the legislation, and the march took place. We now have the emergency legislation that went through, which I voted absolutely against, to make Palestine Action into a terrorist organisation. You now have had, I don't know, over 1,000 people already arrested on this. So what are we doing but turning the cause of Palestine into a cause of attack on the civil liberties of all of us? This is not going to end well unless the government begins to think seriously about what their legacy is going to be, about our traditional rights to protest, our voices and need to be heard. So I just think we need to be there at the next big Palestine demonstration. The London one's on the 6th of September. I assume there's a parallel one going to be in Edinburgh on that day, but I'm not absolutely sure about that.
I've been told we have, we must now go to questions.
Yeah.
I love their questions, but I also want to hear you. So please raise your hands. There are questions on this side.
James over there.
So microphone over there. The young ladies first. I'm a Colombian, so my mother would kill me if I don't do this. So.
First of all, I would just like to say, and I'm sure Duncan will agree with this, it's a great honour to be talking to somebody who made a pretty key appearance in my higher politics essay from my exam recently, actually.
Yep.
Jeremy.
And what grade did you get?
I got an A.
No, don't tell. You got an A.
You got an A.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, so I only found out about your new political party, your party, on Instagram, actually. And I spoke to my mum about it. I said, have you heard about this? Have you heard the news? And she said no. And I figured that that must be because the algorithm thought that I must like it. As a young person who's obviously quite interested in politics, and I wanted to know if you had sort of thought about that, if you wanted your party to be led by young people, if you'd thought about if we were sort of a target audience, you could say, for it, if that was sort of your intention.
The intention is to get as many people as possible to join and support it, and obviously looking at ways of making that appeal. I want the thing to be very community-based, hence the emphasis on these local meetings, but also the heavy use of social media to get the message across. The algorithms are very hard to fathom, and those who write and make the algorithms, and indeed use AI in it as well, are very, very powerful indeed. I can imagine what's going on. Every time I turn on my computer, Nigel Farage appears on the screen immediately. I mean, and then followed by a summary of the news as related by GB News, which doesn't please me very much, so I need another algorithm. If you've got one, let me have it. And so, yes, there is also the way in which algorithms can be used to suppress the circulation of news. We used social media very heavily in the 2017 general election, and actually very effectively. We got a great deal of support of people to register to vote and join in, and we got the highest Labour vote this century, 2017. The Tories particularly, to some extent Liberal Democrats, more Tories, had got wise to all this by 2019, and they were using all kinds of algorithmic methods of getting their message across and suppressing the message that we were putting. It works the whole time, and so it is a battle about access and availability of social media that's part of it. I understand that. I'm not pretending I'm the world's greatest expert on it, but I do understand the power of social media. But I also understand the sheer poison that can be there on social media. You put something eminently decent and reasonable up on X, for example, then you read the feed on it, wow, you know, and then you realize that somebody who's following 3,000 people but only has 50 followers of their own possibly doesn't exist. You know, it's a bot. And so you have to watch out for all that as well. But yes, we are very keen to develop a social media input.
I know this is quite a different topic, but also quite connected to youth. I just wanted to ask a question about the crisis for Scottish universities at the moment. Because in, let's say, St Andrews has almost 47% of the students going there being international students, whilst only 20% of students from those universities are actually Scottish. So why do you think this is, and how do you think we could solve this?
I think the problem we have across the whole of the UK, and Scotland included in that, is the economic model that we've turned universities into, away from being independent institutions of learning into underfunded institutions that have got to pull in as much private money as they can in order to survive. And overseas students are very lucrative so far as universities are concerned, and that is the model that they're following. Whether it's going to last or not, I personally doubt, because British universities are very expensive. Overseas students pay a phenomenal amount. Whether they get a commensurate benefit, I'm not really sure, but it obviously reduces the places for others. And I am very concerned about all of this, very concerned about, in the case of English universities, the level of student fees that students have to pay. When Blair introduced the 1,000 a year student fee, I remember his acolytes running around Parliament saying, don't worry about it, it's only 1,000 a year, nobody will notice it, and it'll never go up. Wow. But it only went up 900%, so it's not a big increase. What we have now is a whole indebted generation because they went to university. It's appalling.
And 80% of the sector is broke.
What?
80% of the sector is already in deficit.
Yeah, and the deficit problem in every single university is absolutely massive. So what do we have? A massive debt level of students, much of which will never be repaid. So some point, some government, somewhere in the future, is going to have to write off most, if not all, of that student debt. And secondly, the government is either going to have to intervene to bail out a large number of universities that are deeply in debt and not likely to get out of it, or close those universities. So because of this absurd economic model that the Thatcherite period introduced, we're now into a situation that's incredibly damaging to very good quality universities all over England, Wales and Scotland. And so that has to be faced. Otherwise, what do? Lose these great institutions, lose the opportunities, and end up with a series of very small private universities, as they did in Chile under Pinochet, where they got rid of most of the, what I would call effective higher education institutions, and replaced them with very small, not very good private universities. So it is a huge issue, and thanks for raising it.
We still have time for questions. Another question at the back, and then one here. There.
Do you two want to come in on the question?
Okay.
Come in on the questions. Yes, so as you know, the voting age in Scotland is 16, and there's talks to lower it nationally in the UK to 16. And I was just wondering.
It has been.
It has been lowered.
It has been lowered nationally.
Yeah. I was wondering. Sorry, what do you think the impact this will have on young people and their knowledge of politics going forward, as well as the impact it will have on the political stage, kind of the rise of reform, the far right? How will younger people be able to vote impact that?
I support lowering the voting age to 16 across the whole of the UK, and indeed I tried to amend the general election bill in 2019 to make the voting age 16 rather than 18. This is when Boris Johnson introduced that particular piece of legislation. And so I support it, but it also means we have to think much more about what is taught in schools. What I get from teenagers is often an annoyance that in school they're taught nothing about politics, but they're also taught very little about the sort of basic needs of life, like, you know, owning a bank account, paying rent, all that sort of thing. They say, why aren't we ever taught any life skills as well as other things? Some schools do it, many don't. So yes, I do support lowering the voting age, but it has to be accompanied by an information campaign to ensure people understand and how they participate in politics. Now, there's an assumption that everything we did in 17 and 19 resulted in lots more young people voting. Yes, the proportion of young people voting went up considerably between 2015 and 2017, but it was still lower than the average for the rest of the population. And in the last election, it was still considerably lower than the average for the rest of the population. So don't run away with the idea that every young person is desperate to register, vote and vote. There has to be a serious information campaign about responsibility. And your point, well, the point was made over there about universities, ought to be one of those issues that are raised, because young people need to be able to influence their own lives as well as the lives of all the rest of us. How do you feel about that?
Duncan and I were having a conversation earlier about how we're quite lucky, we've learnt a lot about politics in our school. We have great teachers that teach us a lot, so we have quite
We're not
No.
just saying that as well. They did. They
Yeah.
they actually do. We're not just being nice to them.
Are they here, the teachers?
Some of them, yeah.
They'll pay us later. But yeah, so we have quite informed opinions, which we feel quite lucky about. So we feel that with the voting age being lower, we'll find higher turnouts for younger people because, like I said, we'll have a lot more knowledgeable opinions. So we want to be able to voice it and vote for it and hopefully make some change in the future.
I think there's a lot of young people that are perhaps more politically engaged than some of the older generation seem to think sometimes.
Oh, indeed.
Yeah.
Some people never get engaged at all. But it is surely politics ought to be about creating a society fit for the next generation.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And you are the next generation.
One final question.
I jumped back into international politics. Heard a lot about Palestine very appropriately. One on Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
You were chair of Stop the War Coalition in a period when matters worsened in Ukraine and Donetsk and Lugansk. This is 2014 period. And it's arguable that the Stop the War Coalition absolutely was spot on with the question about weapons going in there. But that policy seems to have continued into the more recent period. Of course, we're aware you ceased to be chair and engaged in way back in 2015, but what currently are your views and position on what seems to be the continuing no weapons to Ukraine policy of the Stop the War Coalition? What is your position on weapons to Ukraine?
Thank you.
Now?
The situation in Ukraine is obviously appalling, and you've got a First World War style of conflict going on with conscripted soldiers of Ukraine being killed by conscripted soldiers of Russia and the other way around, and a massive flow of weapons in from both sides. Russia is wrong. It should not have invaded Ukraine, absolutely. I think Russia was just completely out of order in doing that. The question then is, how do you take it forward? I've just finished reading a very interesting book by Medea Benjamin of Code Pink in the USA. She also thinks Russia is wrong, but she also traces the history of the relationship between NATO, Western USA, and Soviet Union, later Russia, and the build-up of NATO forces eastwards, particularly after the mid-1990s, and especially after Lisbon 2006. And so where do we go from here now? Yes, there has to be a ceasefire. Hopefully that will happen sometime soon. Ceasefire is no more than that. It is merely a freezing in time of a conflict that's going on. It doesn't resolve the conflict. So you've then got to look going forward, what do you do? There has to be a demilitarization. There has to be a Russian withdrawal back into Russia, away from the border. Likewise, there has to be an agreement that the West is not going to militarily occupy Ukraine, because that will just set the whole thing off again. And there has to be a point of self-determination for the people of the Donbass as to what their own future actually is. That isn't going to happen straight away. And the loss of life and the destruction of society and the economy is appalling. The other thing is that where were the UN, Western Europe and so on, in trying to A, prevent the conflict getting worse after the initial Russian advance beyond the immediate parts of the Donbass, and secondly, the African Union, the late Pope Francis, President Lula Ignacio da Silva of Brazil and others tried to intervene to get ceasefire talks going, usually rebuffed by somebody or other, in trying to do that. But then I asked another question. If Russia and Ukraine are capable of talking to each other to agree on grain exports going through the Black Sea, are capable of agreeing that Russia would not attack Ukraine while President Biden was visiting, wow. If they can have those talks and those negotiations, for God's sake, they could get a ceasefire. They could stop the killing that's going on. And behind all this, there's a lot of murky forces around. There's those that want the minerals, those that want the oil, those that want to sell the weapons, and President Trump very keen to get the rare earths out of Ukraine into the hands of American companies. And so the analysis of this war is going to be one about greed, profiteering, horror stories, and faux nationalism all around the place. For God's sake, let's have a ceasefire and stop the killing. Try and demilitarize the conflict and bring about some kind of permanent settlement, because Ukraine isn't going to go away, Russia isn't going to go away, the people aren't going to go away. There has to be a peace settlement and a deal, and let's push for that.
Please, before we end, join me to thank the young voices of Scotland who have been heard here on stage.
Well done, Ben.
Thank you.
And of course, a big thank you to both Laura Alvarez, who's not here anymore, and Jeremy Corbyn.
Could we also add a big thank you to Beyond Borders for the opportunity, and to Charlotte and to Rose for helping us out, getting prepared and everything. So thank you very much to Beyond
Absolutely.
Borders.
Absolutely.
And can we thank Oscar?
Yes.
Well, they
Made it much less stressful.
They know me already. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please now join us in the Wall Garden for some evening music with Los Chicanos, and enjoy the end of the day with a drink and the sounds that they provide of a jungle Peruvian cumbia.